So, hi, Dondrea. You had mentioned that excellence is exceeding the standard or status quo and doing it with an intention and purpose. And it
Yeah.
means setting the bar and embodying the spirit of continuous improvement. So, I'm curious, how do you and your team practice that at the profit table?
Well, we do it in a lot of different ways. I could go technical with this and say we've got our trackers and we've got delivery dates for things that we need to send to clients. So we have lots of policies and procedures around that. But where I like to really focus is what is the type of relationship we want to have with our clients and how can we add to that? And so a lot of it is in the tone in our emails. It's how complete those emails are, and are we going the extra mile in our responses to them? Because at the heart of it, um, excellence is only as good as it's received, I think. You can do a thing really, really well, but if it doesn't connect or doesn't help, then is it really excellent? You know? So making it more than just like a measurable result, but having it make like real impact. And we talk about those things all the time.
I love that. I love that you started your response with the type of relationships that you develop with the clients
Mhm.
and that it's more than just measurements, but it's also impact
Yeah.
because that's where performance can get lost is if there's an overemphasis on performance and then relationships are sacrificed for it
Right.
or like you said like there's not that connection or it's not received well. I think it's even more critical now with our use of technology and how
Yeah.
much information is like exchanged online versus face to face. Like how do you guys navigate that space with a lot of communication being online versus like meeting clients one on one, especially when you have
Yeah.
big rosters.
Right. I take the opportunity when I am able to get FaceTime, I do that. So whether it's at a conference or, if someone's local, maybe grabbing a coffee with them or something like that. So I do make time to do that when I can. But outside of that, we use a lot of video. I use voice notes. I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and just call out of the blue sometimes. Text messages are a little bit more personal. So yes, we've got great distance between us. Sometimes they're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. But looking for ways that they personally connect with people and finding out how we can do that without being an interruption to their day.
I love that. So how does that then transcend to your team? Like how are you building relationships with your team so that your team is also one doing the performance part of
Mhm.
excellence, but then also that relationship component carries over when they engage with clients as well.
Right. So whenever I have calls with clients, or, let's just say I've spoken with a couple of clients today and I've got notes. Yes, I'll share those written notes, but then I'll also follow up often with a meeting with the accountant and to say, hey, this is what she's got going on in her business. This is what I foresee happening. And then I'll ask, what's your take on this? Or how do you expect to see this show up? And so making it more of like, what would I do if I were in an office setting with them? Would I stop by their office and talk about a particular client or something that's coming up? So trying to infuse more of that. Our team meetings are where we, get to share a bit about what's going on for us personally. And so that helps for us to develop a relationship internally because however good that relationship is, transfers over to our relationship with the clients too.
Uh,
So we try and make sure we do that. Not recently, but in the past, we've done like I call it a little retreat, but we all got together, everyone who was local, and had like a little spa day and just really got to know each other just outside of the Zoom boxes. So that was really fun. But yeah, so we do things like that. I've sent them gifts before, here are the things that I'm loving. Let me know what you think about them. They share books with me, all of the things. We're just really trying to get to know each other.
And
Yeah.
you do that so well. So for those that are listening, I've had the honor of working with Dondrea and her team, and I love them. They have such like a great dynamic and they work together so well. I think that's because they're very aligned in their mission and how much they care for their clients. I am curious with what you said about the collaboration, how and that conversation that you have with the accountants, how does that impact your work and your ability to build off of each other and really deliver like a high level of service?
Yeah. So what, from my perspective, what I see is they're in the nitty-gritty details every day. And so I really depend on them to share with me what they're seeing happen on a day-to-day basis because I'm trying to stay, from a bird's eye view, here's what's happening and what's going on. So it creates that reliance. They stay on top of the day to day, and then I can stay kind of high level, and then we meet to discuss the two, and then that's the full scope. I think it helps to for them to understand the bigger picture because they are the first ones to see when something's going wrong or if it's going really, really right, and we might need to make even some adjustments for that. I think it helps to streamline the flow of work so they're not unnecessarily asking clients questions that, are taking time. They're getting the full view of everything we have. And so they can be confident when they ask a client for something, we really need it. And the same thing from the client perspective. They know if we're asking, it's something we really need because they don't get a lot of back and forth from us. That's one thing we really try to eliminate.
How do you anticipate the client needs and reducing that back and forth? Like, what are some of the things that you've put in place along the way, or how do you practice that?
Yeah. So really understanding what a client is asking you beyond the question that they put in the message. That I'm huge on that. So yes, we might get a question of, can I buy a particular thing? That's one of my favorite ones. Can I buy a particular thing? And really taking that opportunity to say, they don't really just want a yes or no answer, or maybe they do, but might they get a better response from us, such as, here's what I would suggest looking at on your budget to remind them of the work that they've already done to say, what are the parameters around my spending for this year? And then to say, where am I now? So that they think about the decisions that they've made up to this point, and then moving forward, what might be on the horizon. Because it's really more than just that one question. And so sometimes we actually send that as a response so that clients can kind of walk through that thought process because at the end of the day the decision rests with them, but we want to offer our support
Right.
in them making that decision.
And I love that because you're teaching your clients how to fish instead of just giving them the fish. And I
Mhm.
think that goes back to like one of your core tenets, which is empowering people to make smarter decisions with their money. And so, like, you're educating them on the different things to consider
Mhm.
instead of just a simple yes or no.
Right. Because we're not trying to create that dependency where they have to have us to be able to move forward in making a decision. Because sometimes they will need to think and act quickly. And so, what is it that they need to think about? What am I looking at to even tell them what my recommendation would be? And so, sharing that stuff with them, as well. I also think about how we communicate, like as we're switching processes internally, things that might affect them. And so, like, really sending them our reasoning. One of the things I'm thinking about is when we made everyone the primary admin on their QuickBooks accounts, explaining to them upfront, hey, we're going to be rolling this out where we're switching you to primary admin if you aren't already, and here's why we're doing it and why it matters. And so I think that type of proactive communication is good too.
I agree because like setting the expectation up front and then addressing any concerns that they have, but also the benefit to them, it
Right.
just sort of sets the tone so that they feel like they're in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. And that is what we want. They're the CEO and we want them to fully operate in that role while we support them as well.
How do your team meetings that you have contribute to the growth of the team, but also to like the collaboration component and just making sure that everyone delivers on the mission of helping people with their finances?
Yeah. I think I think I'm responsible for a lot of that. Um, but I will say, I think it goes all the way back to making the hire. You know, it's making sure that they were aligned, that this is our mission and our purpose. And they came in and that's what they're about the same things. So it's something we look for at the very beginning, not looking for just a really great accountant because we can teach you what you need to know on the accounting side or, but looking for someone who could pick that up and run with it, who exercises care and conversation, who, is smart and pays attention to detail, all of those things. So I would say that's one way we hired for that. And I think that made all the difference.
I'm so glad that you talked about that because that is a point that I wanted to emphasize because you have a great team and they've been with you for close to 3 years, maybe more.
Hmm.
And that's a long time, whether you're a
Yeah,
small business or in a corporate
yeah.
setting. And it goes back to the hiring and identifying great talent and then creating a culture that really nurtures them and
Hmm.
helps them grow.
Right.
And you've done a phenomenal job with that. So I think that's interesting to hear the things that you paid attention to in the interview process
Hmm.
and their alignment with the mission and the values.
Right. Right. And I appreciate that so much. I love my team
I
and
do too.
yeah, I really do. And the beautiful thing is that who they were when they first came in is still here, which
Mhm.
is great. But they've also grown so much too, just in the types of initiatives they take just within. So I think they feel comfortable enough to, spearhead engagements and process rollouts and things like that. And just seeing them step up and take initiative makes me really proud as we're working together. And so that's another thing I will say about the collaboration is giving them more than just task and actually making them responsible for like overseeing a thing has really strengthened us as a team as well.
You are good at delegating. How have you become comfortable with that? And how, like, what things have you done along the way that have enabled you, whether it's like the team has shown themselves to be able to do something, or whether it's something that you've practiced in order for you to confidently delegate out to them?
I'm going to receive all of that I'm a good delegator because I don't always feel like one. And I will tell you, just over the years, we're in year 7 of business now. And I think back to, like the first 3 years, I would hold all of the work, all of it. And then I brought on another accountant, and then I would barely give her things, you know? And so I've had this work in several different ways. One is the accountant just takes the work from me. It's not really me saying, hey, you be responsible. And then sometimes it is just from an overabundance of work. I simply can't do it all. But the times that I enjoy the most are where it is really intentional and where I think about what has to come up. I like to think in quarters, what's happening on the financial front by quarter. And then I say, well, these are the things that I would like to see happen for clients. And I know Stacey's really good at this thing. Lynn's really good here, or this will require a lot of communication, and she's great at that. And then I ask them, hey, this is what I'm thinking of in terms of a process or what we need to see happen. Would you like to come on board or take over that process and you be responsible for seeing it through to completion? And so that works really well. It's like putting people in the places where they have strong traits or they can really excel, and then having that open door where they can come back and ask questions if they need clarification about things or just need support. So that's kind of been the navigation for me on delegation.
I agree with you, and I'm glad that you said the part about aligning it with their strengths
Yeah.
because when someone is able to operate in their strengths, then it's a lot easier for them to execute and execute at a high level
Hmm.
because they have that confidence, they have the experience, and they can continue to apply themselves. And especially if it's something that they're excited about,
Yeah.
it just makes it so much easier for the team.
Yeah. And then actually letting them do it, not micromanaging them, Yes, I can offer feedback, and when it's over, we can look at what went well, what didn't, and maybe modify it for next time. But just really letting the process play itself out.
So we have a question from a listener, and it ties in exactly to what you just said about providing feedback. They had asked
Mhm.
how to approach employees with constructive criticism with respect and assertiveness.
Yeah. So I would say for that, it's knowing that we're all on the same team and we all are serving the client. And so I always want to approach them with respect because I expect the same. So that's first. And then assertiveness for me looks like just being clear about what the facts are or what the expectations were. And then having them, talk about why things went the way that they did. Because once we determine, like, okay, something went off the rails, then giving them the opportunity to say what they think happened, and what they might do differently. Because I think a lot of times in work settings, if you don't allow that, you're going to miss something, you know?
Right.
Yes, processes and tasks and things can be clear cut and dry, but then what are you missing out on when you don't allow them to tell you what went wrong or how it went wrong? And it's almost like a sure bet that it's going to go wrong again if you don't get that info.
I agree. Oh, adding to that, I think, so for those of you listening, also for me as an observer of Dondrea and her team, what really underscores her ability to have those conversations well is because she has an existing relationship with her team. If
Mhm.
she didn't have the existing relationship with her team, it would be a lot harder to have those types of conversations with them because
Yeah,
there's typically hesitancy about how the other person's going to receive it, or and then also their perception of the conversation and how they choose to respond. But because, like Dondria pointed out, everyone's on the same team, headed in the same direction, and there's been such intentional effort and practices put in place to support each other and have that connection. That's what makes it so much easier to then approach team members with feedback and have it be constructive and still
yeah,
have them receive it with respect. And I think the other thing that um, you mentioned that is really important that I want to double down on is having the conversation with team members and having them explain their perspective or their side
mhm,
of the situation. Because as an individual, regardless of your title, but especially as leaders, we have a perception of how things go or
mhm.
how we want things to go. And I would say there's a good portion of that that's in our head and may not actually be defined. And
Right.
so understanding like where that gap is, like we have
Mhm.
expectations around something, but where's that gap in the understanding? Is it like in a process that needs to be refined? Is it in communication that needs to be like clarified?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like getting their
I
feedback.
Getting their feedback, yes, 100. And the other thing I would add to that is the one-on-ones with employees and having those go both ways. So you're not just evaluating their performance, but allowing them to give you feedback as well, and say what some of their needs are. I know. I think it goes both ways. Yep.
It does because it's such a relationship and like we don't know everything. We're all working together to build each other up.
Hmm.
Obviously, like as leaders, we're driving and we're like, directing the ship
Yeah.
because we have a vision, we have a mission, but everyone else has just as an important role.
Right.
And like we want to make sure we're rowing in the same direction and pulling our weight and using our strengths.
Hmm. And two, to understand that clients work with the profit table. They don't work with this accountant or that accountant. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, they're going to speak about us as a whole. And so I think that kind of nails it down for me. Even when I was in public accounting, it was not that they worked with Dondria, not that they worked with, my coworker. They worked with this one company. And so we're all representative of that, is what I'm saying.
That brings up a great point that I'm curious about because in today's society, it seems like so many small businesses are encouraged to have brands that are founder driven publicly. And
Mhm.
I don't believe that there's anything wrong with the founder having a public persona because they're the face of the brand, they're driving
Yeah.
business, they're converting sales, all of that. Where the challenge lies is when clients come on board and they have this expectation that they're only going to be working with that individual because that's all they've seen on social media.
Mhm.
And how do you create this transition where clients are confident in working with other members of the team?
Yeah. So one of the things that we have done in the past is they'll have, that best fit call with me to see if they're a good fit, if we can serve them. And then they would also meet the accountant. And I would do a call with, the accountant on as well. So
Sort of
that's
like a
one of the
handoff.
sort of like a handoff, or an introduction, I would say is
That's
better.
better. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry.
And then no, and then after that, now we do have a handoff message where we say, hey, we're introducing you to your lead accountant. She'll help with document gathering and things like that. I've also tried with the accountants actually being on the monthly calls. And while that was good, I think that we got to a point where it was time consuming. It was during the time we had a lot of calls.
Right.
So those are a couple of the ways. But what I think works best is if I'm always talking about our accountants. So I talk about them on social. When I have those best fit calls, I'm very clear to say, we have a team of, and let them know what that would look like for them. And so having them be visible on our client portal, you can actually see your client service team. So you
Right.
don't just see, get messages from me or see my picture. You see everyone on the client service team. And I think all of that sort of helps them to see it as more than just me and more as a firm.
I like what you said about including them in the conversation and including them in the social conversation. Like it's not
Yeah.
just you, but
Mhm.
it's the team. Like we're
Yeah.
all working together. And
Yeah.
so to your point, like when a client comes on board, they know that they have a team that's advocating for them,
Right.
which is then like the beauty of a wealth of experience.
Hmm. Yeah. And then I look at it too from a continuity perspective. Let's say I need to step away for a day. There's got to be someone who knows your finances as much as I do.
Right.
Otherwise, service stalls. And then what happens?
Especially for finances in a business.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, transitioning to leadership, you had explained that leadership is by example. It's in
Hmm.
actions, communication everywhere, but we set the tone for the type of leader we are by what we do and how we show up consistently. So,
Yeah.
how does this show up in your work with clients, especially since they're looking to you for guidance with their finances? You touched on this briefly earlier when you were sharing how they can make their own decisions,
Hmm.
but how- expanding on that. How
Yeah.
does leadership show in that role?
Yeah. So I I have an agenda when I show up for meetings because I want them to know that I value their time. In that, I want to make sure I touch the most important parts while we're there. And then I also give them the opportunity, to add anything to that agenda or share during our call. So that's one way. I approach the call as judgment free. If something has happened, we're going to talk about it, and then we're going to talk about the best plan of action or next course of action. But no judgment, you know. And so that I feel like that keeps things clear for us to have really transparent and candid discussion, and that is required when it comes to finances. So that's one thing. The other is in our delivery. So we have a delivery schedule. Our I don't want to say our client agreement, but that's really what it is. It says that we deliver by the 10th, but there's reasons behind why we deliver by the 10th and why we deliver earlier, so we adhere to our delivery. And so it's showing up when we say we're going to show up is the way that I look at delivery. And that's one of the things. And then we ask for their feedback. We send them surveys, let us know how we're doing. And I think that comes back to us with who they send our way, who they refer.
I agree. You mentioned about showing up to meetings without judgment. And I think that's such a key component, especially with dealing with finances, because finances in general, whether they're personal or business related, come with a lot of emotion
Mhm.
because of the either the way that we associate things with money, how we treat money, how we were raised, and like
Right.
our perceptions of money, how we look at wealth, all of these different things. So how do you navigate those conversations when people are feeling reserved
Mhm.
about sharing their finances, or maybe there's a situation where, you know, maybe they're a couple of years behind, whether it's in accounting or taxes or whatever the case may be, because some people just get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And when you're overwhelmed, you have a tendency just to shove it under the rug, and then there comes a pain point where then they have to deal with it. So like
Right.
how what's that look like? How do you navigate those situations?
Yeah.
Teach leadership as
So,
well.
yeah. I so when it comes to that, looking back is I feel like it's necessary, but where are we today? And so that's how I like to approach that conversation is you're here now, you're seeking support now, and here is what it could look like moving forward. Will we need to go back and clean up the mess? Absolutely. But we can also do that while still moving forward. And so I feel like that sort of removes them from the stress of what has already happened, but sets them up or shows them a path out of it and what the future could look like. And it's done in increments. And so I let them know this won't be fast, but there is a way out of it. And I think that's something that, and I've heard from clients that if they make a mistake, they don't fear it. They know that we're going to talk about here are the potential consequences. Here's what it looks like coming out of that. And let's move from here, from this point.
Are there certain things that you do to help them acknowledge their role in where they're at now so that they can change those habits or practices and move it so that they can continue to move forward? Because one of the things that I like that you said is like that it's almost like you create a pivot point where like this is the
Yes.
past and like this is the future, and we are going to focus on like the future because that gives people hope, and like
Right.
hope is what we need to drive us forward.
Hmm.
And so but also like acknowledging like we don't want to bring some of that baggage with us.
Right.
So
You
what do you
know,
do?
I've tried different ways to do this. I'll reference one in particular, where this particular client said, "Oh, I won't be able to pay myself from month to month, and I don't make enough money to do that." And so showing her, over the past 3 months, this is what you spent on personal expenses. They've been commingled in with business expenses, so you weren't able to see it. This number actually exceeds what you want to pay yourself every month if you just paid yourself and stop moving transactions through the business. So it's like putting facts and real data behind, some of their concerns or, areas where they feel like they may not be up to par is telling the story of their numbers. This is what I see, and the numbers don't lie. I say all the
Right.
time, they are what they are. I'm the narrator. I'm going to tell a little story about what I see, but they're in control of where that goes next.
What I pulled out
So,
of that is that
yeah,
you help create clarity. So like
yeah,
you can have like this situation in your mind, you can have like their own story, like all the reasons why you're at
yes,
where you're at and what's contributed to it. But to your point, like coming to you, like you actually create clarity for them to make decisions because you pull
right,
the numbers out because the numbers don't have feelings. The numbers are just numbers.
right. They're just what they are.
And then show them what they can do moving forward, like with the choices that they make.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
how one of the things that I love that you do, and it is a perfect segue to what we were just talking about, is budgets.
Hmm.
Because in my observation, there's not enough small businesses that are using budgets or that value the budgets the way that they should. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, like, because it's something that I know that you do with your clients, and I love it because I
Mhm.
know, like, the impact that it can have. What it like, for budgets, like, what are
Yeah.
some of the things that you've seen that you can share
Yeah.
of the positive impact of people using budgets, but also then, like, what's the impact to, like, the founder or the owner? Like, how does that make them feel? What's, like, the things that are removed in regards to, like, stress and ease of making, like, decisions and all of, like, how's that look?
Yeah. The biggest thing that I see, if someone's doing a budget for the first time is realizing their place and how much weight it holds on the budget. And so, because I deal with a lot of small business owners, usually businesses of one or lean small teams, looking at what salaries look like. What type of load of expenses are you carrying and where are you carrying it? Whether it's people, whether it's marketing, whether you've got other people doing client revenue generating work type of situation. So just really looking at where your dollars are going and then getting clear about what's required. And that step usually comes after we look at here's what we can reasonably expect revenue to be. You know, I think about at the top of the year how many of us set revenue goals for the year, but did we set them considering our capacity, considering what expenses we might have to take on in order to make that happen? And so looking at that from a budget perspective, month by month, for let's say like a year's time, and being able to put that together, it really helps people to make some really tough choices about is that how I want to spend? Is that really my revenue goal or does it just sound good? Am I meeting my expectations or Instagram's expectations? Like what does it look like? And then saying, okay, this is what good profit looks like for me. Because we can follow all of the percentages online that we want to follow about what your profit margin should be and what you should be charging and all of that. If it does not work for your business, it just does not work. We've got to see what does.
How do thinking about, like, revenue projections and all of that, I
Mhm.
think that's can be challenging because you also have to consider past history, you also have to consider the market, and then
Yeah.
also looking at the patterns of client behavior within your own
Yes.
business.
Mhm.
Is that something then that you, like, walk the client through?
Yeah. So I like to do three budgets. I call it the good, better, best budget in those cases. Now, if someone's not really in a growth phase, they're, sustaining the business along, they've kind of hit their sweet spot and they're just rolling with it. We don't necessarily need that. We can base more so off of historical. But if someone is predicting high growth, then we want to look at, okay, based on historical, if we were able to maintain the same amount of revenue, here's what a budget would look like. If we hit, a growth goal, 15, 20%, here's what that budget could look like. And then I always will do like a best case scenario. Like this is that big revenue goal. If everything went according to plan, this is what revenue would look like. And for that one, I pad expenses based on, if you're telling me we're going to hit our $1 million year, but we're going to need, client service manager for that. We're going to need to bring on some more designers for that. I'm putting all of those things in and showing the ramp up to that. Because you've got to set some expectations about when that spending happens. Um, I've seen that go really, really wrong before, where someone says, I'm it's gonna be my $1 million year, but then the first 6 months of the year are light revenue. But the expenses have gone up to meet the $1 million year. That's not what we want to see.
I'm glad that you said that because that's what I was gonna ask is, like, the pull ahead. So, like, if you have someone that is allocated a certain amount of money for, you know, a budget line item, but then they
Mhm.
exceed that, like, what does that look like? Are they then taking that from another category? Are they taking that from the next quarter? Or is that just
Mhm.
something like you're asking them to consider to look at all these things because the money doesn't change, it's just where you decide to allocate it?
Right, right. And that's exactly what we do. And there are some expenses that aren't monthly that are one time, and we expect for them to hit, in a particular month. And then there's nothing else left that's allocated. But then we always allocate profit toward future business reinvestment. And so if you've got cash sitting in that account, then you've got funds available to do that thing. But it's just not been allocated for the year. But you can totally do it from your savings. But if you don't have it allocated, don't have that in savings, understand that you are taking away from something else.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that, again, this whole conversation about leadership, that ties into like part of leadership is self-discipline
Yes.
and also being disciplined with your finances because
Mhm.
you're leading yourself, you're leading the business, you're leading your team. So it requires you to make hard decisions, but you're
Yeah.
looking out for the best interest of the long run, like
Right.
for the growth of the business, for your like
Mhm.
career growth, for the
Yeah.
team.
And sometimes phrasing those messages to clients, I exercise a lot of care with how I say that. And because I always want clients to know that they still are in control and can make a decision. So I approach those conversations with a lot of care.
I love that. And I know that you do.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciate your time so much today, Dondrea. I love our conversation. And is there anything that you would like to share before we go about leadership or excellence?
Yeah. You know what? I'm actually going to throw it back to you because you were my first introduction into leadership way back when.
A long time.
And just, yes, a long time. And just seeing your consistency over the years and how much you pour into whatever community that you're in.
Thank you.
And I'm going to give you your famous quote, keep shining bright.
Uh,
I think you do it so well. So yeah, I'm really excited for this podcast and I can't wait to hear all the episodes.
well, thank you so much for your time, Dondrea. Much love to you and your team, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.